that the good old days will come back. But hope isn't a plan, and nostalgia is not a strategy.
Mark Carney didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't escalate. He did something far more dangerous. He calmly declared that Canada's deep economic ties with the United States are no longer a strength, but a weakness that must be corrected. And that message is spreading fast, not because it's dramatic, but because it reflects what much of the world is already thinking.
That's a leader in this new world with a vast network of reliable allies. That's the Canada Strong plan we're putting into action. Its goals are ambitious: to catalyze $1 trillion in investment, to create one Canadian economy out of 13, to build new trade and energy corridors, and to double the size of our clean energy capacity.
In a long-form address, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney laid out a clear and deliberate shift in economic strategy. Canada, he argued, cannot rely on a single partner, especially one that can change trade conditions overnight. The timing matters. President Donald Trump, now in his second term, continues to deploy tariffs and trade pressure as core tools of U.S. policy. From autos to steel to critical minerals, Washington has made it clear that access to its market is conditional. Carney's response is not reactive, it is preemptive. He is reframing Canada's economic model, away from dependency toward diversification. And while the speech itself may not have introduced new policy, it did something more powerful. It clarified the direction. That clarity is what's gaining traction. Carney's words are landing because they are not uniquely Canadian, they are globally relevant. Across advanced economies, there is a growing recognition that overdependence on a single market creates systemic risk. The past few years have exposed how quickly trade relationships can shift under political pressure. Tariffs, export controls, and sudden policy reversals are no longer rare events. They are becoming tools of statecraft. This context is not theoretical. Since 2025, the United States has imposed tariffs as high as 25% on multiple Canadian exports, and in some sectors like steel and aluminum, rates have reached up to 50%, levels not seen in decades. These measures have disrupted supply chains across North America and forced Canadian firms to reconsider long-standing business models. What Carney is articulating is not a hypothetical risk, it is a lived economic reality already costing billions in trade friction and lost efficiency. Canada is simply the first G7 country to say this clearly. When Carney states that reliance on one partner is a weakness, he is articulating a concern shared quietly by Europe, parts of Asia, and even emerging markets. That's why the message travels. It doesn't need to be endorsed, it is already understood. While few countries are openly backing Canada, their actions tell a consistent story. Trade diversification is accelerating globally. Supply chains are being redesigned to reduce single-point dependencies. Strategic industries, from semiconductors to energy, are being reshored or distributed across multiple regions. Canada fits directly into this pattern. The country is already shifting trade flows. The U.S. share of Canadian exports has declined to roughly 72%, down from higher levels in previous years. That change may appear small, but in real terms, it represents tens of billions of dollars being redirected toward other markets. At the same time, Canada is attracting significant foreign capital as part of this repositioning. Foreign direct investment reached nearly $97 billion in 2025, the highest level since 2007. Even amid escalating tensions with the United States. This signals that global investors are not pulling back from Canada. In fact, they are leaning in, betting on its long-term diversification strategy rather than its historic dependence on the U.S. market. At the same time, Canada is expanding its infrastructure and trade capacity. Projects like the Port of Montreal expansion are increasing throughput significantly, enabling direct access to European and global markets without routing through U.S.-centric logistics chains. This is what alignment looks like in practice, not coordinated statements, but parallel strategy. Trump's trade approach is built on leverage. The United States offers access to its market and uses that access as a negotiating tool. That leverage works only if other countries believe they have no alternative. Carney is dismantling that belief. By publicly stating that Canada will diversify, and by backing that statement with policy direction, he is reframing the U.S. market as important, but not irreplaceable. That distinction matters, because once access is no longer viewed as exclusive, tariffs lose their psychological impact. They become a cost of doing business, not a strategic threat. And when that shift occurs across multiple countries, the effectiveness of U.S. pressure begins to erode, not through confrontation, but through irrelevance. Canada is uniquely positioned to make this move credible. It is not a small or vulnerable economy. It is a G7 nation with vast natural resources, stable institutions, and strong trade relationships beyond North America. It supplies critical inputs, energy, minerals, and industrial materials that are in demand globally. For example, Canada provides the majority of U.S. crude oil imports, with flows exceeding 4 million barrels per day. That alone gives Ottawa leverage in any long-term recalibration of trade. In addition, Canada's push into critical minerals, lithium, nickel, and rare earths, places it at the center of global supply chains tied to energy transition and advanced manufacturing. This is not a country trying to escape dependence from a position of weakness. It is repositioning from a base of strength. Timing is everything. Carney governs with a parliamentary majority, giving him the political space to pursue long-term structural changes. He does not need immediate consensus, and he can absorb short-term economic pressure in exchange for long-term strategic gains. At the same time, domestic sentiment has shifted. Trump's aggressive rhetoric and unpredictable policy moves have made the idea of reducing U.S. dependence more politically acceptable within Canada. In other words, Carney is not leading public opinion, he is consolidating it. This allows him to communicate more directly with less diplomatic ambiguity, and that clarity is precisely what gives the speech its impact. This speech is not viral in the traditional sense. It is not trending because of a single moment or a dramatic confrontation. It is spreading because it captures a structural reality. Carney's earlier global speech at Davos in 2026 received a rare standing ovation and drew attention from leaders across Europe, Australia, and NATO partners, precisely because it framed the end of the US-led economic order and called for middle powers to act together. That reaction is a preview of what is happening now. His message resonates not because it is loud, but because it aligns with a broader geopolitical shift already underway. When a leader articulates a shift that others are already experiencing, the message travels naturally. Analysts, policymakers, and investors recognize the implications, even if governments do not publicly endorse them. That is what is happening here. Carney has not created a new idea. He has made an existing one impossible to ignore. Mark Carney's speech is not just about Canada. It is about the future of how countries relate to economic power. By labeling dependence on the United States as a weakness, he has reframed a decades-old assumption at the heart of global trade. The significance is not in the words themselves, but in what they unlock. If Canada can successfully reduce its reliance while maintaining growth and stability, it will demonstrate that strategic independence is not only possible, but preferable. And if that model holds, the real question becomes unavoidable. Is the world already moving beyond US-centered trade, and Canada is simply the first to say it out loud?